evening. It's Thursday, 13th of March, and here's what's making news around the world on World News Tonight. Train rescue. Pakistan security forces in dramatic train hostage crisis killed 33 militants after day-long standoff. Ukraine security. European defense ministers unite in Paris to draft new security framework for Ukraine amid US-Russia shift. Space delay. SpaceX delays ISS mission due to launchpad glitch, postponing arrival of replacement crew.
From Colombo, this is World News Tonight with Prashansa Gunawardana.
Good evening once again. We begin with news from Pakistan, where security forces have successfully ended a dramatic hostage crisis. After a tense day-long standoff, troops stormed a hijacked train, killing all 33 separatist militants and rescuing hundreds of hostages held captive on board.
Pakistani security forces stormed a train on Wednesday that had been hijacked by separatist militants, killing all 33 attackers and ending a day-long standoff involving hundreds of hostages, the military said. The Baloch Liberation Army, or BLA, blew up a railway track and opened fire on the train as it was traveling through southwestern Pakistan. It was carrying over 400 passengers. Some passengers released by militants reunited with their families in Quetta earlier on Wednesday. A military spokesperson said 21 hostages and 4 security troops were killed over the course of the standoff. The BLA said before the army announcement that it had killed 50 passengers. The group had threatened to start executing hostages unless authorities met a 48-hour deadline for the release of political prisoners, activists, and missing people it says had been abducted by the military. The BLA is the largest of several ethnic armed groups battling the government in Balochistan. In recent months, militants increased activities to inflict high death and injury tolls and target Pakistan's military.
Former Philippine President Rodrigo Duterte is now in the custody of the International Criminal Court in the Netherlands following his dramatic arrest in Manila the day before over a brutal, years-long anti-drugs crackdown that left thousands of his citizens dead.
Former Philippine leader Rodrigo Duterte has been taken into custody by the International Criminal Court following his arrest in Manila on murder charges linked to his war on drugs. That's according to a statement from the court, or ICC, on Wednesday. The 79-year-old arrived at Rotterdam Airport on a chartered plane and was transferred to a detention unit on the Dutch coast. He will be brought before an ICC judge in The Hague in the coming days for an initial appearance, the statement said. The court's warrant for his arrest alleges that, as president, Duterte created, funded, and armed death squads that carried out murders of purported drug users and dealers. Duterte's war on drugs was a signature of his presidency, which lasted from 2016 to 2022. The anti-drugs crackdown killed thousands and drew condemnation from around the world. He could become the first Asian former head of state to go on trial at the ICC. Justice! Supporters and protesters gathered outside the court. In Manila, the remains of more than a dozen victims of extrajudicial killings were laid to rest Wednesday, part of a non-governmental organization's program aimed at helping impoverished victims find a resting place for their slain relatives. The 44-year-old son of Josephine Camendo, who was killed in 2016, was among the remains interred.
South Korean military investigators have charged 2 Air Force pilots over an accidental bombing of a village last week. The bombing injured at least 29 people and caused extensive property damage.
South Korean military investigators on Thursday charged 2 Air Force pilots with criminal negligence causing bodily harm for accidentally bombing a village during a training exercise. The incident injured at least 29 people and caused extensive property damage. The Defense Ministry's Criminal Investigation Command said the pilots' errors in entering coordinates were direct factors behind the accidental bombing. 8 unguided bombs from 2 fighter jets hit a village in Pocheon during live-fire exercises. The area features training grounds used by the South Korean and US militaries. A ministry official said that the 2 pilots have been removed from flight duties and a review of their certification is scheduled. The Air Force Chief of Staff apologized last week and pledged to review procedures to prevent future incidents. North Korea, which often criticizes South Korean and US military drills, said the accident highlighted the risk of conflict, noting the bombs could have dropped north of the border. An investigation into the incident is ongoing.
Singapore and Vietnam have agreed to enhance cooperation in subsea cables, finance and energy, marking an upgrade in their relations to Vietnam's highest level during a visit by its Communist Party chief to the city-state.
In a move that signals deepening regional cooperation, Vietnam and Singapore have upgraded their ties to a comprehensive strategic partnership. The announcement came during the visit of Vietnam's Communist Party chief, To Lam, to Singapore, where he met with the Prime Minister Lawrence Wong. The leaders witnessed the signing of 6 key agreements focusing on a wide range of cooperation areas, from digital connectivity and undersea cable development to cross-border data flows and green development. Southeast Asia, a vital hub for global internet infrastructure, is racing to meet soaring demand for AI services and data center expansion. Vietnam alone plans to roll out 10 new submarine cable projects by 2030, while Singapore remains a digital powerhouse in the region. Singapore asset manager Keppel and Vietnam's Sovico Group are already in talks to jointly develop new undersea fiber optic cables. Last year, Vietnam's Vitel and Singapore's Singtel also signed a preliminary agreement to build a direct cable between the two countries, although construction has yet to begin. Beyond digital infrastructure, both leaders discussed expanding industrial parks and fostering green development. Singapore pledged support for helping Vietnam establish international financial centers. Singapore remains one of Vietnam's top foreign investors, contributing over $10 billion in 2024 alone, nearly 27% of Vietnam's total foreign direct investment. As the region navigates global economic shifts and technological transformation, this upgraded partnership reflects a shared commitment to long-term stability, innovation, and growth in Southeast Asia.
Let's take a short commercial break. More world news on the other side. Welcome back. Russia has given the US a list of demands for a deal to end its war against Ukraine and reset relations with Washington. It comes after the US proposed a deal for a 30-day truce to break up the conflict between Kyiv and Moscow.
Russia has given the US a list of demands for a deal to end its war against Ukraine and reset relations with Washington. That's according to 2 people familiar with the matter Wednesday, though specifics were unclear. It comes after Washington had proposed a deal for a 30-day truce to break up the conflict between Kiev and Moscow that followed Russia's invasion of Ukraine in early 2022. The sources said Russian and American officials discussed the terms in detail for the past 3 weeks. They described the Kremlin's terms as broad and similar to demands Russia previously presented to Ukraine, the US, and NATO. Those earlier terms include no NATO membership for Kiev, no deployment of foreign troops in Ukraine, and international recognition that Crimea and 4 provinces belong to Russia. On Tuesday, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said he would agree to a 30-day truce as a first step toward peace talks, while Russian President Vladimir Putin's commitment to such a potential deal is still uncertain. The Trump administration has not explained how it is approaching its negotiations with Moscow. The two sides are engaged in 2 separate conversations, one on resetting US-Russia relations and the other on a Ukraine peace agreement. The administration appears to be divided on how to proceed. This all comes as Russia's defense ministry claims to have retaken territory held by Ukraine troops in Kursk in western Russia. Ukraine says its soldiers will keep operating in Kursk as long as needed and says its troops are fighting in and around the major town of Sudzha.
Defense ministries from Europe's 5 largest military nations, France, Germany, Britain, Italy and Poland, met in Paris to discuss a new security framework for Ukraine in response to the US-Russia rapprochement.
Defense ministers from 5 European nations convened in Paris on Wednesday local time to discuss bolstering regional security and defense cooperation in the aftermath of the Ukraine war. The meeting comes amid Washington efforts to pursue a peace deal with Moscow. Defense ministers from the United Kingdom, France, Germany, Italy, and Poland discussed strengthening European defense mechanisms and providing security assurances to Ukraine amidst ongoing geopolitical shifts. Ukrainian Defense Minister Rustem Umerov also participated. A key point of the discussions was the potential establishment of a European reassurance force aimed at deterring future aggression and ensuring Ukraine's sovereignty. The deliberations also addressed the proposed Rearm Europe plan, which seeks to mobilize up to 800 billion euros to boost Europe's defense infrastructure.
US President Donald Trump has intensified his tariff rhetoric, now signaling plans to introduce reciprocal tariffs aimed at matching the trade barriers imposed by other countries.
U.S. President Donald Trump on Wednesday stressed that April 2nd will be a very big day for the United States as his reciprocal tariffs go into effect. Trump slammed the previous administration for America's losses in trade, but said the U.S. will take back a lot of what was stolen from it by other countries. However, Trump also noted that he has shown flexibility on his tariff policy, rejecting claims that his policy implementation has been inconsistent, as seen through his on and off tariff impositions on Canada and Mexico. The U.S. leader also warned that once the tariffs go into effect, there will be very little flexibility. Meanwhile, U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer said on Wednesday that the European Union's new retaliatory tariffs against the U.S. came too little, too late. According to Greer, the EU's latest tariff on U.S. imports completely disregards the national security imperatives of the United States, adding that the bloc's trade and economic policies are out of step with reality. The comments come as the EU announced it will respond to Trump's 25% tariffs on steel and aluminum imports by imposing its own tariffs on U.S. goods worth over $28 billion, set to take effect on April 13th. Canada also announced its own retaliatory tariffs on nearly $30 billion worth of U.S. imports after the 25% steel and aluminum tariffs went into effect on Wednesday. Canada says it will follow a dollar-by-dollar approach and impose 25% tariffs on U.S. imports, including steel, computers, and sports equipment. Meanwhile, Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum says her country will wait until April 2nd to decide whether to respond to the steel and aluminum tariffs.
Foreign ministers from the G7 group of major industrialized nations have convened in Canada amid rising global tensions and uncertainty over the U.S. foreign policy, with Secretary of State Marco Rubio expected to brief allies on Washington's latest diplomatic efforts.
Marco Rubio arrived in Canada on Wednesday with a smile on his face, although some tense discussions might be lying ahead. In the midst of a trade war and as diplomatic relations between Canada and the United States deteriorate, the neighbors are supposed to focus on Ukraine during the G7 summit. But before the start of the talks, the head of the U.S. diplomacy reminded what Donald Trump is currently focused on.
What he said is it should become the 51st state from an economic standpoint. He says if they became the 51st state, we wouldn't have to worry about the border and fentanyl coming across because now we would be able to manage that. He's made an argument that it's their interest to do so. Obviously, the Canadians don't agree, apparently, but so we're going to be focused in the G7 on all of those things. That's what the meeting is about. It is not a meeting about how we're going to take over Canada.
Despite Rubio's reassurance, experts fear that absorbing Canada and Trump's tariffs risk to overshadow the talks on a truce between Ukraine and Russia. Kyiv backed a US-proposed 30-day truce, while the Kremlin said it is still waiting for more details on the proposal before reacting. Security guarantees, however, are still absent from the draft ceasefire deal.
Let's take a short commercial break. More world news on the other side. Welcome back. A technical issue at the launch pad forced SpaceX to postpone the planned flight to the International Space Station, delaying the arrival of a replacement crew needed before NASA astronauts Butch Wilmore and Suni Williams can return home after spending 9 months in the orbit.
2 U.S. astronauts who have been stuck in space for 9 months will have to wait at least a few days longer to return home, after SpaceX on Wednesday scrubbed the launch of a rocket carrying a crew that was meant to replace them, called the Crew 10. NASA was set to launch a SpaceX rocket from Florida to relieve Butch Wilmore and Suni Williams from the International Space Station. But the agency said the launch was called off due to a hydraulic system issue with a ground support clamp arm for the rocket. The astronaut pair has been stuck on the ISS for the past 9 months after NASA deemed that it was too risky for them to fly home on the Boeing Starliner craft they arrived on, which suffered propulsion system issues in space. NASA says Wilmore and Williams cannot leave until the new crew arrives in order to keep the ISS staffed with enough U.S. astronauts for maintenance. The Crew 10 flight would normally be considered a routine astronaut rotation. Instead, it has become politicized, as U.S. President Donald Trump and his advisor Elon Musk have, without evidence, blamed former President Joe Biden for the fiasco. NASA had moved the mission up 2 weeks earlier than planned under pressure from Trump and Musk, the CEO of SpaceX. NASA swapped a delayed SpaceX capsule with a different one that would be ready sooner. The agency now says that the next potential launch opportunity is no earlier than Friday evening, which would put Wilmore and Williams on track for a March 19th departure from the space station.
The interior of a Herculaneum scroll, unseen for nearly 2,000 years, has been imaged for the first time with the help of an artificial intelligence, with expectations it will reveal brand new ancient philosophical writings.
This is an ancient scroll that was buried by the eruption of Mount Vesuvius 2,000 years ago. Scientists say it could reveal brand new philosophical writings. AI is changing that. Here's how it's helping researchers unroll scrolls like these, virtually. The Vesuvius Challenge is a global initiative that's dedicated to deciphering Herculaneum scrolls like this one. AI has been trained to spot the ink on the scroll, but not to understand the words. This helps make sure it doesn't guess or change the meaning of the text. This scroll is one of 3 housed at the Bodleian Libraries in Oxford, England. The virtual unrolling of it has revealed substantial parts of the papyrus, including several columns of text. One of the first words deciphered being the ancient Greek word for disgust. The Vesuvius Challenge is now inviting contributions from the global community to interpret the text. The material found could potentially reshape our understanding of literature from that era. With the ball rolling, Parsons says 2025 could be a breakthrough year.
After lying hidden beneath meters of volcanic rock and ash for 2,000 years, a once-in-a-century find has been unearthed in the ancient Roman city of Pompeii in Italy.
2,000 years later, Mount Vesuvius still towers above the ruins of the Roman city of Pompeii. Walking in before the crowds, we headed to the edge of the excavated area. Archaeologist Dr. Sophie Hay takes us inside the latest discovery.
Wow. These frescoes are spectacular. They go on 3 walls, and you can see the figures are nearly life-size. They're wild women doing things that typically women didn't do at the time, like eating raw meat, like hunting, and their initiation rites into the mysterious cults of Dionysus.
Were the real women going to go out to the woods, hunt animals, eat raw meat? We still don't know that.
We're walking on Roman ground level here, about 30 feet underground. It was all dug by hand, Dr. Hay explains. First, 10 feet of pumice stone from the eruption, then toxic gas and ash.
They basically seal the top of Pompeii. So if you're left in the city at that point, you're never going to leave.
Following Dr. Hay down,
just how the Romans did it, right?
We descend into a small room where 2 people died, barricaded inside. The skeleton of an older woman clutching gold and pearl earrings.
And this is portable wealth. This is something she can use beyond the walls of Pompeii after the eruption. Sadly, she never had that chance.
Was this her lavish house, or was she a slave, maybe a thief? But director Anna Onesti, who heads the dig, says the good news is they've only uncovered half the site.
Every day here there is a surprise.
After a landslide that struck a neighborhood in La Paz, Bolivia, some residents were forced to abandon their pets. A day later, officials and families returned to the rubble of homes to rescue 4-legged friends.
Some owners were forced to abandon pets during a landslide that struck a neighborhood in La Paz, Bolivia on Monday. A day later, officials and families returned to the rubble of homes to rescue 4-legged friends. Animals whose owners weren't able to retrieve them were taken to temporary shelters. Heidi Velarde from La Paz City Hall said if they need it, landslide victims can also choose to drop off pets at a shelter. Reuters saw residents dragging their belongings through the cracked streets on Tuesday. Bolivian state news said at least 40 families were affected by the landslide. Deputy Mayor of the Southern Marco district, Fabricio San Martin, said that a 57-year-old had died during the disaster.
Well, that's a wrap from all of us here at World News Tonight. I'm Prashansa Gunawardana, and we leave you with stunning visuals from the Saint Laurent Fall-Winter 2025-2026 Women's Wear Collection, unveiled during Paris Fashion Week. Thank you for watching us. Have a good night.